The morning air bit like it had teeth, but Lark hadn't noticed the cold in weeks. Not really. Hunger and hopelessness did more damage than weather ever could. She tightened her coat around her ribs and led Dusty down the frost-laced path, her boots crunching softly over frozen mud. The gelding plodded beside her, one limp in his back leg, and his winter coat rough with burrs and months of neglect neither of them could afford to care about. He was all she had left that hadn't been repossessed, shut off, or driven away. The town of Calverton didn't look at her much anymore. That suited her fine. The locals had learned how to turn their gazes just slightly, enough to spare themselves the discomfort of seeing someone lose everything. She passed the boarded-up corner store, the truck that hadn't moved in 3 winters, the old man in the window who always watched like the past was still happening outside. Nobody waved. Nobody asked where she was going with the horse. They knew. The auction yard loomed like something holy and cruel, framed by sagging fences and frost-bitten weeds. Trucks idled in the gravel lot, the kind with rusted bumpers and hay bales still in the back. The smell of manure, diesel, and hot metal clung to the ground. Men laughed in bursts. Someone spat. The sound of a gavel cracked over the loudspeaker. Lark swallowed. She had scrubbed Dusty's face the night before with melted snow and an old rag. It hadn't done much. His coat was dull, his ribs sharp as rails, and a chunk of his right hoof had chipped off during the last storm. But his eyes were still kind. Still trusting. She hated him for that. They passed the pen where livestock waited for their turns on the stage. Cattle, ponies, an angry-looking mule. Dusty walked with the slow resignation of an old preacher, headed to a sermon no one would stay awake for. A man in a vest and too tight jeans flagged her down. "This the one?" he asked, glancing at his clipboard. Lark nodded. He looked the gelding over. "You got papers?" "No." He grunted. "Any known medicals?" "He's got a limp. Doesn't rear. Doesn't bite. I raised him myself." The man didn't respond. Just scribbled something and handed her a tag. "You're number 43. Line up past the loading chute. We'll call you in." Dusty flinched as the tag was pinned loosely to his saddle strap. Lark reached up, smoothing his mane. "It's all right," she murmured, even though it wasn't. It wasn't all right at all. She stood in the cold for nearly an hour, trying to ignore the sounds of bids, the sudden sharp laughter, the harsh clang of trailer doors slamming. A colt bucked wildly a few pens down. A child cried. Lark didn't move. Her fingers gripped Dusty's lead rope so tightly her knuckles ached. Number 41. She counted down in her head. Thought about what she might eat tonight if she got $30. Lentils, maybe. Flour. Could stretch that into dumplings and broth if she was careful. Rent was off the table. So was the propane refill. Maybe she could trade feed sacks at the co-op for used blankets. Maybe. Number 43. Her stomach dropped. She exhaled slowly and led Dusty forward. The auction ring was bare bones, wooden slats, a short-railed pen, and a raised platform where the auctioneer perched like a crow. Men in flannel leaned over the rail. Someone in the back chewed something loud. A teenager sat by a clipboard, not looking up. "All right, folks," the auctioneer boomed. "Next up we got number 43, a gelding with a few miles on him but still sound enough for light work, maybe a pasture pet." Lark kept her head down. Dusty stood beside her, still. Like he knew how to be humble for the crowd. "Do I hear 20? Nothing. $20. Someone cleared their throat. 15. A man near the rail raised a hand. 15, thank you. "Do I hear 20? Another bid. A thin voice. Lark didn't look up. 25. "Do I hear 30? Dusty shifted beside her. She kept one hand on his shoulder. 35. A pause. 40. Lark shut her eyes. 40 wouldn't feed them both. Not anymore. 45. The voice came from the back. Steady. Low. Not loud like the others. Something about it cut through the cold and noise like a warm knife. "Do I hear 50? A younger man near the front called it out, half a smirk on his lips. 55. 70. It came again from the back. Same voice. Clearer now. Heads turned. Lark finally looked. The man was tall, broad-shouldered under a worn duster coat, a faded brim hat pulled low over his eyes. He didn't look eager. Didn't even look at her. Just stood still, hand down now, like the bid was nothing more than an observation. 70, going once. No one countered. Twick. Lark swallowed hard. Sold. $70 to the gentleman in back. The gavel fell like thunder. She didn't move. Dusty didn't either. The teen came with the papers, what little there were, and mumbled something about handing over the lead. Lark did, slowly. Her fingers lingered too long on the frayed rope. When she let go, it felt like she'd cut a thread that held her upright. The man walked forward. Dusty moved toward him willingly, head lowered. The man paused near her. Up close, she could see the lines around his mouth, the gray at his temples, the quiet tucked behind his stillness. His gaze was unreadable. "He won't go far," he said. His voice was gravel and sunlight. "My land backs Miller Creek." She didn't reply. "You're welcome to visit him. He looks for you." Lark's jaw tightened. "You don't know that." He gave the faintest nod, as if to say, "Maybe not, but I believe it anyway." Then he turned and walked away, Dusty following behind him like the whole world hadn't just broken apart in Lark's hands. She stood in the ring as the next lot was called up. People moved around her. She didn't hear the bids. Didn't feel the wind pick up. Just heard the slow clop of hoofbeats fading into gravel. She left the yard on foot. Didn't look back. Couldn't. The road home felt longer without Dusty beside her. The world heavier. Her legs stiffened with every step. The sun had started to dip behind the hills, and the cold grew teeth again. She dug her hands deep into her coat pockets and walked faster. By the time she reached her trailer, the wind had picked up. The tin siding rattled like it was trying to peel itself away. She ducked inside. The air inside was colder than out. The space heater had died the night before, and she didn't have enough left for the deposit on a new propane tank. Her fingers were red from windburn. She filled a kettle with what little water remained in the jugs and set it on the old stove. A small burner hissed to life. She sat at the table, staring at nothing. The tea would take 10 minutes. She wouldn't drink it hot. But the ritual counted for something. On the counter sat a picture of her and Dusty, taken 4 years back, the last time he still had shine in his coat and she still had light in her eyes. They were both thinner now. She turned the photo down. The floor creaked. A breeze slipped in through the kitchen window, humming low against the glass. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and shut her eyes. Dusty's weight was still in her muscles. Every ache. Every mile they'd ridden. Every morning he'd wickered for hay she couldn't afford. The silence was immense. But somewhere, past the frost-bitten fences and creaking barns, a man had raised his hand without asking why. And a horse had walked away, quietly, without a fight. She didn't know if she'd ever see either again. But something in her chest, faint and sharp, said, "You will." It started with no plan. Just a walk. 3 days after the auction, Lark found herself trailing the edge of Miller Creek with a half-unspoken reason tucked in the hollows of her chest. She told herself it was nothing. That she just needed fresh air. That the frost-crusted brush and bare trees didn't pull her forward with any intention. But her feet moved like they remembered something her mind wasn't ready to name. The morning was brittle. Each step sent little shatters through the top layer of frozen dirt, and her breath came in clouds. Her coat hung looser than it used to, sleeves dragging past her wrists. She'd tucked a bruised apple into her pocket, not for herself, but because it was the last one on the counter, and she couldn't throw it away. The ranch came into view like something out of a dream she'd forgotten having. White fencing, neat lines, wood barns stained deep with age. It didn't boast or shine, it just belonged. The place looked like it had been there before names were carved on maps. She didn't step past the gate. Just stood beside it, one hand on the weathered post. Dusty was in the far paddock, head down, his coat brushed clean. His tail no longer hung in clumps. His limp was still there but softer, easier. He lifted his head slowly when she whistled. One low, three quick, a pattern from years ago when she'd called him back from creeks and ravines and foolish corners of the world. He stared at her, then blinked, then whickered once, soft and puzzled. She didn't know if it meant anything. The rancher appeared from the barn, a pitchfork in hand. He paused when he saw her. Didn't wave. Didn't move. She could have turned around then. Instead, she stood her ground. He came closer. Close enough to be a silhouette against the rising sun. Clay. That was the name she'd overheard someone say when he signed the auction slip. Thought I might see you. Lark said nothing. She pulled the apple from her coat and held it out between two fingers. He nodded. Go ahead. He'll come. She hesitated, then swung the gate open with the same reverence she'd use for a church door. Dusty took 3 steps. Stopped. Ears forward. Lark crouched low and held her hand out. He came the rest of the way and nosed the apple into her palm like no time had passed. She didn't cry, but her throat locked and her hand trembled as he crunched the fruit. You did right by him, Clay said behind her. No, she whispered. I just ran out of ways to fail. He said nothing to that. But the silence wasn't cruel. When she rose, he was gone. Back toward the barn, giving her space. That, too, felt like something sacred. She left without saying more. But the next week, she came again. Dusty was closer to the fence that time. And Clay was by the porch, a mug in hand, nodding once before heading inside. The third time she showed, he handed her a brush. She took it like it weighed more than iron. The strokes were slow at first, hesitant, but Dusty leaned into them like the rhythm never left. Clay didn't hover. He fed the dogs, rolled a wheelbarrow past, refilled the chicken feeder. Quiet tasks. The kind people did when they weren't trying to make conversation but didn't mind if someone was nearby. The barn smelled of cedar shavings and sweet hay. Clean. Settled. A little world inside a world. That afternoon, she stayed longer than planned. The sun dipped early, and frost kissed the edge of her sleeves. She didn't ask to stay. Clay didn't ask her to leave. Let me know if you need tack oil, he said as she set the brush down. She nodded. The next visit, she brought bread. Not fresh. A few days stale, sliced into awkward hunks. She set the cloth bundle on the porch and turned to go. But Clay opened the door and simply said, "Coffee's hot." She sat across from him in a kitchen that looked lived in but not messy. Mismatched chairs. A quiet, ticking clock. Dishes air-drying in a tin rack by the sink. She sipped slow, the warmth soaking into her. He didn't ask where she lived now. She didn't volunteer that the trailer's waterline had finally cracked. But she noticed how he filled her cup a second time without asking. She told him, on that 4th visit, about the day she'd found Dusty. Still a colt, hock-deep in a wire fence, bleeding and wild-eyed. He should have bolted. Bit me. Something. But he just stood there. Shaking. Clay nodded. Some horses know when they've been given a second chance. She nodded too, but her gaze didn't rise from her mug. The next few days blurred. She woke to frost on her pillow and a weak sun through warped glass. She wrapped herself tighter in the old wool blanket and stopped checking the mailbox. There was nothing left to expect. Then came the envelope. Hand-delivered, not posted. From the county. Final notice. Eviction. She held the letter for a long time, staring at the words as if they might change. That night, she walked. She told herself it was just to say goodbye. Dusty was already by the fence when she arrived, as if he'd been waiting. She ran her fingers through his mane, burying her face in the warmth of his shoulder. Clay was by the barn, looping a coil of rope. He paused, looked over. She didn't try to hide the envelope in her hand. "Trouble?" he asked, voice careful. She gave a faint shake of her head. "No more than usual." "Want to talk about it?" "Not yet." He nodded once, then turned back to the rope. "Thanks for letting me come here," she said softly. "It's your horse," he said. "He never stopped being yours." She felt that like a bruise under her ribs. "I won't be bothering you again," she added, meaning it. "Don't decide that for me," he said without looking up. The wind pushed at her coat like a warning. She left soon after, feeling more seen than she wanted to be. 3 nights later, she was still sleeping in the back of an abandoned shed behind the feed store. Her bag was under her head. Her boots doubled as a pillow block. Rain clattered on the tin roof like fingers drumming bad news. A knock startled her. She sat up, heart hammering. It was Clay, holding a thermos and a folded blanket. "How'd you? Charlie down at the co-op saw you. Said you've been walking around like a ghost." She didn't answer. He held the blanket out. "I've got a guest room. I'm fine. You're soaked through." "I'm not Charity." "No," he said quietly. "You're tired." She stood slowly. The blanket remained between them. "You think I can just come stay at your place?" "You already do," he said. "Just haven't slept inside yet." That nearly cracked her. She took the blanket. Didn't thank him. Didn't have to. They walked back in silence. The ranch lights were soft in the distance, golden through the fog, like they'd been waiting this whole time. He gave her the guest room. Clean sheets. A patched quilt. Dusty wickered outside the window. She stood in the doorway a long time before entering. She didn't sleep well that night. Not because it was cold, but because it wasn't. Because the quiet held no teeth. Because the warmth made the broken pieces inside her ache with the memory of what wholeness used to feel like. Morning came with birdsong and frying eggs. She rose and dressed in silence, then stepped out into a house that didn't feel like hers but didn't shut her out either. Clay was in the kitchen. He didn't say good morning. Just handed her a plate. She took it. She sat. And for the first time in months, she ate until she was full. Lark woke to the sound of a rooster that didn't belong to her. At first, the moment before full waking, she didn't remember where she was. The quilt was too warm. The walls weren't bowed in. The floor didn't creak when she sat up. Sunlight was crawling in quietly through a window without frostbitten corners. No rattling tin, no wind whistling through broken seals. Then she saw the boots beside the bed, clean, dry, and the memory settled like a weightless coat. Clay's ranch. Not hers. She stood slowly, testing the feeling of clean clothes on clean skin. Clay had left a shirt and pair of canvas work pants folded on the chair. He hadn't said a word about it the night before, just pointed to the bathroom and the clean towels like it was ordinary. She wasn't sure if she was grateful or offended by how normal he made everything seem. Outside, Dusty stood near the fence line, nosing the dew-heavy grass, that familiar limp barely noticeable now. He looked like a different horse, but when she opened the screen door and stepped out, he lifted his head the same way he always had, as if nothing had changed at all. She wasn't ready to call that mercy, but it was close. Clay was by the chicken coop, scattering feed with that same quiet deliberateness that had marked everything about him since the day they met. He didn't look up as she walked over. Just handed her a coffee in a dented enamel mug. "You snore," he said simply. "I do not." "You do. Like a bear rolling downhill." She raised an eyebrow. He didn't smile, exactly, but something softened. The day moved in pieces. She helped mend the east fence with a pair of rusted pliers that bit her palm. She mucked out a stall and barely gagged. By late afternoon, she had blisters, and a strange kind of calm she couldn't explain. Her body knew how to do this. Work. Earn its place. Be useful. It had just forgotten for a while. In the barn, Clay handed her a bottle of water and leaned back against a beam. You ever think about buying another horse? She asked quietly. He shook his head. I don't replace things I haven't mourned yet. She let that sit. What happened to her? She asked, softer. Clay didn't answer right away. Dust motes spun in the shaft of late sunlight between them. May was the kind of woman who could tell when a cow was going to birth twins just by the shape of her shadow, he said finally. Ran this place better than I ever did. Got sick. The kind of sick that makes you feel like you're disappearing before you've even left. I'm sorry. He nodded like he'd heard it before but still needed the hearing. She died in spring. The house kept breathing like she might come back. Lark didn't speak. Just sat on the edge of an overturned feed bin and listened. She had a thing for wind chimes, he added after a while. Hung 'em everywhere. Drove me nuts. Can't take 'em down now. They didn't talk more that evening. The next day, a neighbor dropped by, an older woman named June, who brought over canned peaches and left with a knowing glance between Lark and Clay that made Lark's ears burn. She always been like that? Lark asked. June. Clay nodded. She once pretended to break her wrist just to make a vet tech come out to dinner. Lark laughed. The sound felt foreign, untangled. By the end of the week, she'd settled into a rhythm she hadn't expected. Up early. Work through the cold. Feed the horses. Fix the fence. Warm meal. Wash hands with cracked soap. Sleep deeply enough to dream. But that didn't mean everything was fixed. She stood in the barn late one night, Dusty asleep in his stall, when the letter from the county slipped from her back pocket. She stared at it on the dirt floor, the bold black font flashing like a bad memory. She hadn't meant to bring it here. But somehow it followed like everything else. Clay passed behind her, carrying a bale of hay. He paused. Saw the envelope. Didn't ask. She scooped it up quickly. I'm working on it. I didn't say anything. I know what you're thinking. He set the bale down with a soft grunt. What am I thinking? That I'm just another stray you took in. Clay turned to face her, dust settling between them like snow. You think I didn't notice the way Dusty looked at you, he said. That horse would have followed you into fire. That doesn't make me less of a burden. You're not a burden, he said simply. I'm a broke woman sleeping in a dead woman's guest room, trying to fix problems I created by existing too long in places I couldn't afford to stay. Clay stepped closer, arms crossed. And yet, he said, the barn roof stopped leaking because of you. The fence holds because of you. Dusty sleeps easier because of you. You don't get to call that nothing. She looked away. Besides, he added, I don't take in strays. I keep the ones who know how to find their way back. Her voice was barely above a whisper. What if I forget again? Clay gave a half smile. Then I'll remind you. She didn't answer. Just folded the letter in half, then in half again, and tucked it away. That night, she lay in bed watching the wind chimes flicker in the window's edge. Each one sang a different note, soft and imperfect. But together, they made something that sounded almost like forgiveness. The days turned colder. She helped repair the old feed shed, fixed the porch step, even painted over the warped window frame with the last of the old green can in the barn. She found a rhythm in the solitude. Then, one morning, the bank letter came. Clay didn't say much. Just laid it on the table between them. She scanned it quickly. Her gut twisted. You're behind. A little. This says auction. He nodded. She looked up sharply. You'd sell this place? Not if I can help it. But the land east of the creek's been sitting too long unused. It's the only part no one'd fight to lose. You'd lose Dusty's pasture. He didn't answer. Lark stood. No. That's not right. I've been behind before. Then let me help. Clay raised an eyebrow. With what? She hesitated. I can take work again. At the co-op, June mentioned they needed help. I could do vet runs again. I still know the circuit. Hell, I can muck stalls for every ranch between here and Harper's Bluff if it keeps you from selling that land. It's not your debt. But it's my life now, she said. Isn't it? Clay looked at her for a long time, then nodded once. She took the truck that day, called in old favors, cleaned stalls, took appointments, cleaned wounds on sheep, helped stitch up a calf, even helped pull a breech foal at the Bailey Ranch. By the time she returned, her hands ached, but she didn't feel tired. She felt useful. She dropped her earnings on the counter. Clay didn't count it. She knew he wouldn't. That night, as they stood outside, Dusty flicking his tail lazily under the starlight, Clay broke the silence. You came back. She nodded. Didn't trust myself to stay before. You trust yourself now? I'm learning. He looked over at her, eyes soft. Then stay. She didn't answer with words. Just leaned against the rail, shoulder to his, and stayed. The sun came earlier now, stretched longer across the hills, and held its breath in golden silence over the ranch. Spring crept in softly, like it didn't want to scare the cold away too quickly. The pastures blushed green, the trees near the creek whispered in new leaf, and Lark woke each morning without flinching. She no longer kept a packed bag by the bed. Dusty stood strong in the east paddock, his limp nearly vanished, his belly filled out, and his eyes as patient as ever. He'd become part of the landscape again, not just a shadow wandering through it. On a quiet Tuesday morning, Lark saddled him. It had been months since she'd ridden. Her hands fumbled at first with the cinch, leather stiff, her body remembering old habits in fragments. Clay came out of the barn halfway through and leaned on the rail without saying anything. He watched her adjust the stirrup leathers, then watched her pause, forehead pressed briefly to Dusty's neck like she needed to borrow his steadiness. Going somewhere? He asked finally. Just up to the ridge, she said. He's ready. So are you. She didn't reply, but he saw the flicker of a smile before she swung into the saddle. The first few steps were cautious. Dusty moved slow and careful under her, ears flicking, waiting for direction. She let the reins rest easy in her hands, posture looser than it used to be. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about trust. They passed the old fence posts she'd mended back in January, the ones that used to lean like weary men. She nodded at them in passing like she would old friends. Beyond that, the trail narrowed, winding up past Miller Creek. Spring water spilled over the rocks, gurgling softly, and the earth smelled wet and full of promise. When they reached the ridge, Lark pulled Dusty to a slow halt. The valley stretched below in every direction. Fence lines curved like brushstrokes across the land, and Clay's house stood quietly below, just part of the earth, not carved out from it. Beyond that, wildflowers were beginning to scatter along the slope. Pinks, whites, the bright flash of bluebonnets where the sun warmed the soil first. Clay rode up beside her on his mare, chestnut with a white blaze that looked like lightning. He didn't say anything at first. Just let the wind move around them. You used to ride like you were trying to outrun something, he said after a while. I was, she admitted. What about now? She looked at him, really looked, eyes crinkled at the corners, face roughened by weather and years. Then back out at the land below. Now I think I just want to ride far enough to remember who I am. He nodded, like he understood. The silence settled easy after that, like a blanket instead of a burden. Back at the ranch, the weekend brought dust and noise. Trailers pulled in. Neighbors. Friends of friends. A few folks from town. Lark had helped Clay put together a small clinic, a day of brushing up horsemanship, light trail lessons, some casual herding techniques. Nothing formal. Just a way to open the gates and remind people the land still breathed. She hadn't wanted to run it. But June had laughed when she said that. You run half this place already and don't even notice. So she took the clipboard. Coordinated ride times. helped fit saddles. She gave the timid boy from town the gentlest mare, and stood beside him until his knuckles unclenched from the reins. When a stubborn gelding balked at a stream crossing, she stepped barefoot into the water and waited until it followed. Clay watched her from the fence as the sun dipped low. "She's something," someone said beside him. He didn't answer, just nodded, eyes steady. At the end of the day, there was a fire in the pit. Coffee and stew. Old guitar strings, off-key humming. Lark sat with her boots off, Dusty grazing not far away, the soft glow of lanterns flickering over the field. She didn't remember the last time she'd laughed so easily, or how good it felt to know she could walk into a circle and not feel like a stranger. Later, Clay handed her a folded paper, something that had come in the mail that morning. "From the bank," he said. She held it carefully, hands suddenly cold. He didn't say anything else, just stood beside her while she unfolded it. Loan marked as satisfied. Debt cleared. She blinked. Looked at him. "You sold the pasture?" she asked, stomach sinking. "No. We got it back," he said. "Clinic raised enough. June called in favors. Sheriff sold off that seized four-wheeler he's been holding. And you worked harder than anyone. We made it." She stared at the paper again, then looked at him like she didn't quite believe it. He nodded once. "You earned this place 10 times over. Now it gets to earn you back." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Just folded the paper again and tucked it into her jacket. They stood in silence a long time. That night, she walked the fence line by moonlight. Dusty followed her without a lead, head low and ears twitching toward the crickets. At the far end of the property, she turned and sat in the grass. "I almost didn't come back," she whispered to him. Dusty nosed her shoulder. "I thought I'd ruined everything." He blinked slowly, then dropped down beside her with a groan and a sigh like he'd been waiting to rest beside her for a long time. Clay found them there an hour later. Didn't say anything. Just stood a while. "You staying?" he asked eventually, voice barely above the breeze. Lark looked up, face half-shadowed in moonlight. "I'm not running." "That's not the same thing." She nodded slowly. "I'm staying." He sat down beside her. The earth held them both. Dusty, too. 3 pieces that didn't look like they belonged, until they did. Morning came soft and gold. They saddled up without talking. Rode out across the fields as the mist lifted. At the crest of the ridge, she turned to him, wind tugging at her jacket. "Thank you," she said, "for not letting me go." Clay looked at her, eyes quiet but clear. "I didn't save you," he said. "I just waited until you remembered how to come home." She smiled then, and rode on.